Welcome to the Oil Minute, creating unlimited value in the oil patch. I'm Zachary Rogers. So today we're going to talk about China, California, the diesel market, and what's going on with ethanol. Let me just get right into it. So first off, the China problem. So basically, yesterday Brent dropped below $40 a barrel. Everybody was talking about it. My estimation is that, of course, it's a multivariate equation, but you really got to look on what's going on in China. So step back in April, May, when the crude price tanked, China bought up a bunch of crude that was stranded, that was very cheap, and then they shipped it over across the oceans into China. The problem is that I think the market now is looking at it and pricing in the fact that the floating storage in China isn't decreasing. So you would expect at some point that these products, that the crude stocks would drain by going into the refining system. But the problem is there's really no incentive for those Chinese refineries to run at the moment, given the weak diesel market, just given the overall weakness of the product market globally. So, until you actually see the refining market pick up, there's going to be a lot of crude that's not going to make its way to China. You're seeing this in VLCC rates, apparently. So my kind of estimation is that unless crude production comes down, you're going to have to build in an incentive to store longer. The way that works is you have to build in a contango. So I would expect some pressure on the front end of Brent and conversely WTI. And there's a little bit of a contango shape, but I would expect that to maybe increase if this floating storage situation in China doesn't dissipate, which again ties back to the product market. California, what's going on in California? So yesterday I was tweeting a little bit about my sort of take on why the state can't actually satisfy the power demand. It's a pretty complicated situation, so I'm just going to try to set this up pretty simply. So California has a variety of sources for its power. So you have solar, hydro, wind, gas, nuclear, and some other ones. We want to kind of focus on solar and gas. So what California's been doing in recent years is they've been increasing their solar capacity, so on homes and businesses, and that's great. But at the same time, they've been reducing their gas-fired generation capacity. So this is creating a problem. So you have more of the grid during the day that's tied up with solar, but the problem is that the sun inevitably goes down. When the sun goes down, that supply of solar just goes out of the system. It's gone. It disappears. So the problem is that the supply of electricity coming out, the solar coming out, is coming down at a faster rate than demand is coming down. Demand comes down when the sun goes down, but the problem is that supply is coming down faster than demand is coming down. So to compensate for that discrepancy, the grid needs to inject power from a new source. One way to quickly flex and do that is through natural gas-fired generation. Problem is they don't actually have the adequate capacity to do that in this situation because they have been closing some gas-fired generation. Another option would be imports. They can import from other states, which they've done in the past. The problem with that, and this is a good quote, is that the rest of the West is hot too, which I saw in an article I was reading. So if you can't import from other states and you can't actually flex and switch from solar to gas adequately, that creates a situation where you need to have rolling blackouts because the grid can't actually meet demand because solar's coming out faster than they can ramp up an additional source. They just don't have the capacity to do that. So this is probably going to continue to happen when it's very hot in California. A longer term solution would be to increase gas-fired capacity or to increase nuclear capacity. Those are both tied up, in a lot of political kind of political aspects of that. So we'll see if California does that, but that's my best sort of simple explanation as to why there's blackouts going on in California specifically. Next story, there's more evidence that diesel is the issue around the world. So yesterday we talked about how there was an article saying jet fuel was the problem, and we laid out the fact that gasoline stocks in the U.S. are actually just a little bit above last year. Jet fuel is below, diesel is 41 million barrels above last year's levels in the US. So diesel is a big issue. But specifically with Europe, according to Reuters, the European diesel cracks are below $5 a barrel. So the crack spread is the price of the product minus the crude price. Below $5 a barrel, that's really getting into you're pressuring even your own operational expenses. So European refineries are also configured to produce more diesel than US is configured to produce more gasoline. Europe's configured to produce more diesel. So unless you actually see a demand shock, which is pretty unlikely, I would expect run cuts in Europe to be on the table for sure. Runs are pretty low, but with cracks that low, there seems to be room for some more refineries just not running as much crude. So last story is going to kind of go down the ethanol rabbit hole. which is actually pretty fun to do on Twitter. There's a lot of hot button reactions of that. I mean, it's incredible how passionate people are on the ethanol thing. But anyway, so according to Stephanie Kelly at Reuters, who I suggest all of you guys follow, Trump administration is moving to deny retroactive waivers from the renewable fuel standard. So basically, the renewable fuel standard requires refiners to blend in renewable fuels into their transportation fuels, gasoline and diesel. So if you're a refinery under 50,000 barrels a day, you can actually apply for a waiver. And what's been happening during the Trump administration is they've been accepting a lot of the waivers, and that's caused a big old dust up between ethanol and the refining lobbies. So according to the story, Trump administration is going to deny additional waivers, which is interesting. Here's my take on this. My claim very narrowly is that the SREs, small refinery exemptions, have not reduced fuel ethanol blending into the gasoline pool. That's a very narrow claim. I stick to it because the EIA, if you look at the data, the amount of fuel ethanol blended in is around 10% of the gasoline product supplied. That's the blend wall theoretically, and it really hasn't moved. You see noise, but it hasn't moved very much. So I don't think that these are affecting the actual amount of ethanol blended in. What it does affect for sure is the RIN price. So the D6 RIN price, which is the RIN that's attached to ethanol production, that's had wild swings in the past few years. It used to be above $1 per gallon, and now it's, it went down below 20, I think, at some point. And I think, according to Twitter, I haven't checked actually, but it seems as if prices are hovering in 40 to 50 cent per gallon range. So the main thing to watch where that price goes is the mandated amount of ethanol that's supposed to be blended into the gasoline pool. You have to compare that number to the blend wall. You have to say, is this more than 10% of the gasoline pool? If it is, then there's room for D6 price upside, because you would have to generate the marginal RIN from a more expensive source, such as advanced biofuels. If the mandate is still below the blend wall, that's when you see the RIN price pretty low. So that's, I think, the lever that we should all look at, is to say, okay, where's the mandate is here. Is this 10% of forecast gasoline demand? And that's what's going to drive the price, in my estimation. One reason I think that it could have some upside to price right now is because gasoline demand is fairly low compared to where we all expected it last year. We didn't foresee the pandemic, so it's a low demand number, but the mandate hasn't changed. So that can increase on a percentage basis the mandate compared to the gasoline pool, which is smaller because the demand is going down. So that's where I think we might see some upside for RIN prices. So that's all I had for today. I'm Zachary Rogers, and thank you for watching the Oil Minute.